They came at night. Hairy, pot-bellied creatures with long arms, wide mouths, and a taste for raw meat. They crept into homes and snatched children from their beds, dragging them into the forest and never brought them back. For centuries, it was just a myth, a story parents told to scare their kids. Then, in 2003, archaeologists digging a cave in Flores Island found bones, eerily similar to the hobbits in the legends. And just a month later, the villagers even said they captured one alive. So what were these creatures, and are they really still among us? In the stories, they're called Ibugogo, the grandmothers who eat anything. Small, hairy, pot-bellied things with flat noses and long dragging arms. Barely a meter tall, the size of a toddler, they swallowed food whole. Fruit, vegetables, raw meat. They raided gardens, slaughtered livestock, and crept into homes searching for human children. According to some versions of the tale, they wanted the kids to teach them something. How to survive, how to live like us, because they couldn't quite figure it out for themselves. But according to other versions, they literally ate the children. One story describes villagers chasing them down after a child went missing, only to find bones and nothing else. So the villagers hatched a plan. They approached the Ibugogo with gifts, bundles of dry palm fiber, perfect for lining cold stone in a cave. The creatures took the fiber, armful after armful, and carried it back into the darkness. Then the villagers waited until nightfall. They crept to the mouth of the cave, heard the murmurs inside, the shuffling, the Ibugogo settling in for the night, and then they threw in a torch. For a second, nothing happens, just a flicker of a flame against stone. Then the fiber catches. The fire spreads faster than anyone expected, racing across the floor, climbing the walls, turning the entire space into a furnace. The Ibugogo scream. They scramble towards the entrance, but the smoke is already too thick. The heat is too intense. Some collapse before they reach the light. Others pound against the walls, choking, burning. By morning, the entire colony is wiped out. Except, legend has it, 2 escaped into the mountains, deeper than anyone dared to follow. Then, in 2003, scientists found something that should not have been possible. Liangbua Cave. The excavation team is on their hands and knees, brushing dirt away from what they think is just another bone fragment. One of them leans in, blowing gently to clear the dust away. They figure it's just another animal fragment, until someone spots a tooth, tiny but unmistakable. Then the brush catches the curve of a skull, and everything stops. They find a jawbone, then ribs, the entire skeleton nearly complete. They measure the femur, check it twice, then a third time. The team goes silent. The skeleton, an adult female, stood only 1.1 meters tall, the same height of a modern 4-year-old child. They call her LB1, the little lady of Flores. Her skull was intact enough to measure the brain case, roughly 400 cubic centimeters. That's about the size of a grapefruit, or 1/3 of the size of a modern human brain. Like everything else in the cave, it was pristine. No scorch marks, no ash, just dirt and bone. At first, some scientists thought they had found a deformity, maybe a modern human with a genetic disorder, but then they kept digging. There were over 100 bone fragments on the cave floor. The team pieced together the remains of at least 14 separate individuals, and every single one was tiny, with the same small skulls and the same unusual proportions. It had been a population, a species that had lived in Flores for tens of thousands of years. They named it Homo floresiensis, the Flores human. The height matched the legend. The brain matched too. But when they looked closer at the bones themselves, that's when things got really weird. Her clavicle, the collarbone, was unusually short, which made her shoulders hunch forward in a way no modern humans do. Her arms were long relative to her legs, giving her proportions that looked more like an ape than a person. The hips were broad and flared, the legs short and stocky, and then there were the feet. The feet were absurdly and almost comically large, flat with no arch whatsoever, proportionally massive compared to the rest of her body. Scientists looked at them and couldn't help but joke. Hobbits really did have giant feet. But the feet weren't the only thing that didn't make sense. Under the microscope, her wrist bones looked nothing like ours. They resembled those of African apes, or Australopithecus, a human ancestor that lived over 3 million years ago, which meant their lineage was ancient, so old that it split our family tree before modern humans existed. This wasn't some evolutionary offshoot that recently adapted to island life. This was something far, far older. Something that had been evolving in isolation while our ancestors were still learning to walk upright in Africa. So what were these ancient humans actually doing in Flores? And how did they live? The answer was scattered all across the cave floor. Stone tools, simple flakes and points, sharp enough to cut meat and scrape hides. When archaeologists picked them up, they noticed something immediately. They were small, perfectly sized for little hands. The oldest tools in the cave dated back 190,000 years, nearly 200,000 years of habitation in one spot, and scattered among them, more bones, thousands of them, not just from hobbits but other animals. Dwarf elements called stegodons, some with stone tool grooves still visible where the hobbits had sliced away the meat. Giant rodent bones snapped open to get at the marrow, even the remains of Komodo dragons, the island's apex predator. These tiny humans were hunting, and hunting successfully, taking down prey much larger than themselves. But the cave floor was strange, clean, in a way caves occupied by humans never are. No soot stains on the walls, no scorched rock. As the team sifted through layer after layer, that detail kept nagging at them. Something was missing, something every other ancient human group eventually figured out. And these hobbits never did. But that question would have to wait, because when scientists dated the fossils, they got a number that seemed impossible. 12,000 years ago. That's recent. Shockingly recent. That would mean Homo floresiensis was still around when humans were farming, when we were building civilizations. If that were true, the folklore wouldn't be a myth. It would be memory. But then, with more precise radiocarbon dating, the truth came out. The youngest Homo floresiensis remains weren't 12,000 years old. They were more like 50,000 years old. And guess when Homo sapiens first arrived in Indonesia? Right around 50,000 years ago. Which means we did overlap for a brief window. Maybe a few hundred years, maybe a few thousand. Modern humans and hobbits shared this island, living in the same forests, hunting the same valleys. Something ancient and alien right alongside us, and then they vanished. But if modern humans and Homo floresiensis overlapped on this island, did we leave any trace of them in our blood? When scientists got to work answering that, they very quickly faced a problem. It was impossible to extract genetic material from the hobbit bones themselves. The tropic heat and humidity of the cave had destroyed it all. After 50,000 years in those conditions, the DNA was gone. So the researchers had another idea. What if they tested the people living in Flores today? Specifically, the Rampasasa Pygmies, a group of short-statured villagers who live practically next door to the Leangbua cave. They're unusually small themselves, averaging around 1.45 meters tall. If any population on Earth carried hobbit DNA, it would be them. They're shorter than average, and their ancestors would have been there when the hobbits still existed. In 2018, scientists sequenced the Rampasasa genome and searched for any trace of Homo floresiensis. They ran the analysis, checked the markers, compared the sequence against every known human lineage. If hobbit DNA existed anywhere on Earth, it would show up here, and they found nothing. No hobbit DNA, not a single trace. The Rampasasa people do carry small amounts of Neanderthal DNA, just like most humans outside Africa. They have Denisovan DNA too, from those ancient inbreeding events tens of thousands of years ago. But Homo floresiensis? Nothing. Zero. We never interbred with them. So if we never mixed with them, and they died out 50,000 years ago, how do the Ibugogu stories match the fossils so perfectly? Let's break this down, because the matches are honestly eerie. Height. The Ibugogo legends describe creatures about 1 meter tall. The fossils measure 1.1 meters. Speech. The stories claim they could only parrot human words without understanding. A brain 1/3 our size strongly suggests limited language ability. Physical traits. Well, They had long arms in the legends, and those long arms were confirmed in the bones. Intelligence. The Ibugogo were supposedly stupid and easily tricked by children. Homo floresiensis had a brain the size of a grapefruit. But here's the problem. Actually, 3 massive problems. First, geography. The Ibugogo stories came from central Flores, around 100 kilometers from Leangbua Cave. Different ethnic groups, mountains in between, and the people who live near the cave, they don't have this legend. Second, time. 50,000 years is absurd in oral tradition. The oldest verified Aboriginal stories date back maybe 10,000 years. This would need to survive 5 times longer, through language shifts, migrations, the rise and fall of entire cultures. Although you could argue that's not too crazy after all, there's some evidence of the 7 sister stories, about the Pleiades star cluster that could date back 100,000 years or more. They mention 7 stars, but we only see 6 today. Around 100,000 years ago, all 7 would have been visible. Third, the folklore isn't unique. Sumatra has the Orang Pandak. Borneo has little people stories. So does the Philippines, most explained by misidentified monkeys or apes glimpsed into jungle shadows. And then there's the child stealing. There is 0 evidence of hobbits kidnapping children. This likely reflects human fear of the other. Here's what most likely happened. Around 50,000 years ago, Homo floresiensis was living in Flores, small, resourceful, using stone tools to hunt pygmy elephants. Then modern humans arrived, taller, smarter, armed with better weapons. The Ibugogo were outcompeted, possibly hunted, maybe deliberately wiped out. There was no interbreeding, no DNA mixing, a complete dead-end branch erased from existence. Fast forward thousands of years, people encounter monkeys in the forest, misidentify them as small humanoids. Then you get stories spreading and mutating. The tales get embellished, swallowing food whole, stealing children. The dramatic massacre is a way to turn the unknown into something you can conquer. That's the rational explanation. But there's one detail researchers can't shake. The thing that made the cave discovery so weird. They sifted through 130,000 years of cave deposits, layer after layer, hundreds of thousands of bones, thousands of stone tools, evidence of hunting, butchering, living. And they found no hearths, no charcoal, no ash pits, no blackened stones where a campfire might have burned, not a single burnt animal bone, nothing. For all that time, 130,000 years of continuous habitation, Homo floresiensis never once controlled fire. Every kill they made, they butchered with stone tools, they ate the raw meat. Tough, fibrous plants would make you sick. Giant rodents, dwarf elephant meat, that would take hours to chew or raw. No fire meant no cooked food, no warmth on cold nights, no light in the pitch black cave. No way to scare off predators or sterilize wounds. If you were inventing a monster from scratch, you could give it any trait: sharp teeth, venomous bite, wings, claws that drip poison. But the Ibugogo legend doesn't do that. It says they feared fire. Then, 50,000 years later, scientists dig up bones that prove they never used it. Out of every possible detail, folklore picked the one that matches reality perfectly. Why? Gregory IV, an anthropologist who recorded these stories in the 1980s, believes the connection might be real. He suggests that maybe, just maybe, some survived longer than the fossils show. No proof exists yet. But Flores has loads of dense jungle with deep cave systems that have never been mapped, and locals still report sightings of small figures moving through trees. As recently as 2015, a documentary titled The Cannibal in the Jungle investigated the claims. And then there's the story from 2004. Just months after the fossils were discovered, a tiny woman was captured by villagers in Boe. According to them, she was exactly like the Ibugogo in the legends. She'd come down from a cave on Ibololo volcano, where the creatures are said to live, But before scientists could examine her, she escaped, vanished back into the jungle, and when the police investigated, they found nothing. Yeah, it's probably all coincidence. But what if? Maybe the stories aren't about creatures stealing our children. Maybe they're about us, wiping out something we didn't understand. And even if one hobbit survived, if that breeding pair really did escape into the mountains, what if it wasn't a story after all? What if they were still out there, watching, waiting?